Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. Welcome to those who are here with us in the Mishkan and those who are joining us virtually. It's great to have you with us. My name is Lise Sklar, and I'm a member of the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative at Holy Blossom Temple. The Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative was established in 2018. Its mission is to provide education, support, and resources related to the challenges of living with or supporting someone with a mental illness. We're a group of volunteers who hope to contribute to ending the stigma around mental illness and encourage those who need it to seek help. To date, we've offered talks on a broad range of topics such as depression, anxiety, addiction, dementia, suicide, and resilience. We've heard from mental health professionals and from those with lived experience. We've created small support groups. We have collected a selection of books dedicated to mental health to borrow from Holy Blossom's library, and our website has a list of resources for those in crisis. And we're always planning. If there are any topics you're particularly interested in, please tell us about them in our follow-up email survey, which you'll receive tomorrow. Now for some logistics. Tonight's program will run until about 9 o'clock. We'll hear a few words from Rabbi McCarroll, and then I'll introduce our speaker, Susan Kagan. Following Susan's presentation, we'll have time for a Q&A. For those here, you'll be able to ask your questions directly. For those watching virtually, please type your questions into the chat box. While the chat box is public, you may ask a question anonymously by writing your name as anonymous when joining the chat. We also have Sasha Fink, a social worker from JFNCS, with us here in person. Should you feel the need for a warm listening ear over the course of our evening, feel free to visit her in the Life Cycle room, which is one floor down. For those watching remotely, her phone number will be in the chat box. Sasha won't be keeping any notes or personal information and is here as a support in the moment. She may also be able to offer some potential resources for later. Now please welcome Rabbi Eliza McCarroll, who we're so grateful to have as part of our committee.
I'll bring it a little bit across here. So good evening, everybody. My name is Rabbi Eliza McCarroll, and one of the joys and most fascinating parts of my role as the assistant rabbi here is to work with the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative. And as we always do, we frame our events with a little bit of Jewish text and ground ourselves in tradition. So when I was thinking about a little bit about what we do with mental health first aid, I am by no means any expert, but it is about crisis solving and being with people in crisis moments. Again, not an expert, but we'll learn more about it from the expert. And there is a passage in our Talmud from Tractate Yoma, which actually outlines different rules to do with Yom Kippur, Hayom, Yoma, and it talks about, in its rambling way, the instance of where you might violate one of the Yom Tov days, those days where we cease from work, in this case, the Shabbat, and that will be relevant in a moment. So it talks about how someone in pain, with a pain in his throat, should be given medicine, even on Shabbat, because it is a case of uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation. And that's when we learn this law, v'chol safek nefashot doche et hashabbat, that every single uncertainty of life, a danger or a doubt over someone's life, their soul, overrides the Shabbat, pushes away, quite literally, the Shabbat. So why might we do this? Why might we use the Shabbat as an example? Perhaps because it's tangible and because the idea that someone could, for example, and this is what the rabbis say, that to not look after that person, to allow them to take in medicine, even on the Shabbat, which might involve all sorts of things like going out to buy the medicine or preparing the medicine, all different categories of work which would have been prohibited. but they're allowed to take this medicine because otherwise they could become sicker, right? They would then have to violate another Shabbat, where perhaps by taking that medicine, they actually would only be violating one Shabbat. That would be both the person giving the medicine and the person taking the medicine. And so it prevents this need from desecrating two Shabbatot. So the reason that I thought about this is because the same way we would use the tool of medicine, of physical medicine, to help someone with their body, we would use the tools available to us to assist someone mentally. Even if it's this rare occasion or this unusual circumstance, and even if we don't exactly feel like we know 100% what we're doing, we would utilize those tools to look after that person. So in fact, our tradition is teaching us that it is nothing more and nothing less than a mitzvah, a sacred commandment, not only because of the immediate value of saving a life in that moment, but because our hope and the way that we could apply this to mental health first aid is to also prevent further issues from arising in the future, and that allows for just a little more brightness in the words of the rabbis, the fulfillment of more mitzvot, maybe in our own days, to allow someone to thrive, to grow, to be loved, and to love in return, and to allow that to be spread in this world. So we can frame this in a halachic paradigm. We can think about the life-saving work that mental health first aid can do, and the way that we, in our tradition, can root ourselves in Jewish text when we think about what we're doing tonight with our guest, who I know that Lise is going to come and introduce to us. So thank you all for being here.
Okay, now I have to, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Susan Kagan. Susan's a registered nurse with over 40 years of experience as an educator and practitioner in the healthcare sector. She earned a bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Western Ontario and master's and doctoral degrees in education at OISE. She dedicated most of her career to teaching in the Seneca York Bachelor of Science Nursing program, from which she retired in 2016, having specialized in psychiatric mental health nursing. Susan cares about people and their health and well-being. She's focused on advocating for the vulnerable in our society, as well as providing mental health education for profit and not-for-profit organizations. She's worked on a mental health crisis team, domestic violence and sexual assault team, and has facilitated groups at the Cedar Center. She is currently involved in volunteer work that focuses on providing care and service to those experiencing homelessness. She has also been providing mental health first aid training since August 2016, and we're so glad to have her here. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to move this. For those of you at home, I am short. Can't see me. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate that lovely introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm really very honored to speak for the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative and your group tonight. I'm going to extend Lisa's introduction a little bit. Lisa talked about what I did, what I've done, but I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and why I do this, why I talk about mental health. And I think it's important because everybody's got their own worldview about mental health, you know, different cultural views, different backgrounds, and we look at it differently. I have lived experience with mental health, both within my family and personally. I went through an episode of depression with some anxiety years back. Reached out for help, got help, learned to manage it, all the symptoms and the different things that happened, and it still works. I mean, I'm still using the tools. Sometimes I have to regroup them and so on, but it still works. The reason I'm telling you this is not just because I want to talk about myself, but it's because I've learned something really important from both my professional career and personally. And that is that there is help out there. And with mental health, people get mired down in a cloud of darkness. There's no help, there's no hope. But I've learned that there is help. It's like any other medical condition. Look at diabetes, for example. You do your diet, exercise, and you take your insulin. For the most part, you're okay. Mental health is no different. I mean, sometimes it's difficult, but it's no different. It doesn't always work, but it mostly works. The same as diabetes. There's people that are brittle diabetics, they have trouble managing it. So that's part of what I want you to take away. If you're struggling, you know somebody's struggling, you have a friend that's struggling or a colleague, any conversation trying to support them, you need to pepper it with hope and optimism. That's so, so important. No matter what you say, it has to have that hope and optimism and that there is help out there. So I want you to tuck that away for now. That's my perspective. I think, too, that we also have to talk. Talk about it, not hide it away. And I think that's why the initiative is so, so important. All right? So that's a little bit about me. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, just to reinforce what Lisa said. When we're talking about mental health, it can be triggering for people for a whole variety of reasons. We don't know who's going to be triggered by what. So I'm very mindful of that. I've tried to keep stuff out that's not particularly triggering. But as Lisa mentioned, there is somebody to talk to. For those of you at home, the same thing. So I just want you to be mindful of that. All righty? So let's rock and roll here and move forward. I'm going to try and do 3 things tonight. I'm going to talk about what mental health is, just give you a perspective on it. I'm going to talk about what mental health first aid is, do self-care, and we're going to end with a coping tool. All right, so first of all, I'm going to give you some definitions. More specifically, I'm going to talk about what is mental health first aid, and then there's 3 parts to it. That's the training program. There's key concepts, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then there's another module we talk about mental health first aid for declining mental well-being. So I'm going to talk about that and use anxiety as an example. And there's another part, another module, we talk about mental health first aid for crisis situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay? And then we'll talk about self-care, which is so, so important. And I'm going to provide you with a coping tool. And then we'll have questions and answers. Okay? So let's begin with talking about definitions of mental health. I'm going to give you a definition of health first. And you're going to get these slides, so I'm not going to go through it all in detail. Okay, but I want to make a couple points about this. When we talk about health, it's defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. And it's about coping. Now, the reason I put the definition of health there, not just mental health, is because when we talk about health, people in our society tend to put health in silos. You've got the physical health here, you've got your mental health here, and they don't mix. Well, it's not the case. We're integrated. We're holistic. If we have a mental health problem, we're more prone to get physically ill. If we have a physical health problem, we're more prone to develop a mental health problem. As a quick example, if you have a heart attack, myocardial infarction, it's not fun, right? You're upset. You can get depressed. But it's not just because of the psychological part. There's physical things going on in your body that also make you depressed. Okay, so we're integrated, we're holistic, we're all together. Health is health. Okay, we can't separate the two. Definition of mental health, this is a bit wordy, but what I want to point out here, your mental health consists of 3 things. Your feelings, your thinking, and your behavior or your actions. If any of those 3 things get out of whack, your mental health is off kilter. Okay, so for example, with your acting, your behavior, if you tend to sleep more, sleep less, eat more, eat less, isolate, that could be an indicator your mental health is sort of going off a little bit and you need to deal with it. Much like your feelings, if you get down, sad, more than usual, or you're thinking very negative things, These are all indicators. Okay? And when we talk about mental health, we look at it from a positive sense, a very positive perspective, positive sense of emotional and spiritual well-being. Okay? Now this term, mental health, is often used synonymously with mental well-being. You may hear that term. In mental health first aid, they tend to use the term mental well-being, but it's often used synonymously with mental health. Mental well-being refers to things like allowing you to realize your potential, to cope effectively with stress, bounce back from life's challenges. What comes to mind there is COVID. Okay, I can remember when we were in that lockdown at the beginning. Oh my God. I've been around the block a few times, and I did not have the coping tools to deal with that isolation. I was like, oh my God, what next? Okay, it was really hard. So I had to find ways, like everybody else did. And to some extent, I don't think I've really completely recovered from it. If someone says, let's go out or do a presentation, I go, no. No, not me. But you know what? I guess I'll tell you this. This is the first in-person presentation I've done in 4 years. And it's absolutely fine. Everything has been virtual. That's absolutely been fine. Okay, so those are things this is mental well-being. It's developing those tools. And the whole idea to me is that you develop coping tools throughout your life, right? You have a little bag of coping tools. As you get older, you get more of them because you've been through more experiences. New experience happens, you'd have to develop more coping tools. And to me, COVID was like that, and I'm sure for everybody. Okay, so that's part of mental well-being. It's about being active, productive members of our community. It's individualized. What mental well-being may be for one person may not be the same for the other. Okay, so one person may be quite comfortable, maybe doing volunteer work, working 3-4 hours a week. Another person may have to work 12-14 hours a week to feel that they're being productive. We're all different. Okay, and it's really that sense of I can do it, feeling capable. Like when you come across an obstacle, and we all do, like obstacles happen all the time, it's having that sense that, okay, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do, but I can figure it out. Okay, so to me, that's what mental well-being is about. And I think it's important to look at it that way. Now next, I'm going to talk about a final perspective on mental health, which is the mental health continuum. And to me, I think this is really, really important to understand this because it provides a very broad and encompassing view of mental health, a very broad perspective. It was developed by the Mental Health Commission to show mental health is not an either-or thing. So in other words, you don't have mental health or you don't have mental health. It doesn't work that way. It slides back and forth. It fluctuates. And you're somewhere along the continuum every day. You may wake up in the morning and you feel crappy, down, sad, whatever, anxious. You take your shower, you have your coffee, you eat, you start to feel better. You get a phone call, you go for a walk or something, so you start to feel better. So it changes. So this is what the continuum is about. So I'm going to show you the continuum. I'm going to open it up. There's 4 panels. And the continuum, we look at it from left to right, and the various columns describe changes in individuals' mental health in behavioral terms. It talks about observed behavior. The gray column, which I'm showing you now at the left, is healthy. You're active, steady, calm, normal mood fluctuations. Then the continuum moves along, and this peachy color one is where you're reacting. Okay, you're nervous, anxious, irritable perhaps, a little bit impatient. You notice these things. And then we go into a phase where if it keeps going along, we're injured, where there's excessive anxiety, panic, angry outbursts, and noticeable fatigue. And then we go to the end of the continuum where there's illness. And this is where you have a diagnosed mental illness like a major depression or an anxiety disorder. And this is where you have excessive anxiety, panic attacks, poor coherence, angry outburst, and a notable change in your behavior. Now, how does it happen then for some people to all of a sudden be feeling fine? And before they know it, they've slid right along and they're in a state of injury or illness, or they go from being calm and all of a sudden they have excessive anxiety, panic attacks. It does happen to some people. And it's so quick you don't even know what hit you. It's like a thunderbolt. So what we need to do is we need to pick up on things when we're reacting. Okay, when you're kind of feeling a little bit out of sorts, you're nervous, anxious, a little bit irritable, impatient, and do something about it then, when you're at that reacting phase. Talk to a friend, go for a walk, meditate, mindfulness, yoga. If we intervene here, it's much easier to move ourselves back to health. If we wait till it slides all along, and if we do have a mental illness, it's very difficult. Whoops, sorry about that. It's very difficult to bring yourself back to health. So the message here is that you do have some control over this, how you move along the continuum. If you catch yourself when you're reacting, check in with yourself. How am I doing? How am I feeling? What's happening? And if you get it there, you can more easily do things. Is that making sense? Okay. Okay, so let's transition now to talking a little bit about mental health first aid and what the program's about. Okay. So what is it, mental health first aid? You know, the way I like to start talking about this is explain it like it's based on the first aid model. So everybody's heard about physical first aid. You're walking down the street, somebody collapses, you go over, you shake their shoulder, are you okay? They don't respond. You call 911, you wait, you comfort them, and the help arrives, then you leave the situation. Like we all get that, right? Okay. Mental health first aid is premised on the same model, only it's with mental health problems that are often invisible, they're often not noticed, and people don't pay attention to it. You got to really look below the surface and see what's happening with somebody. You got to check in with them, and you got to ask them. So this is what mental health first aid does. It's the help offered to somebody that's in declining mental well-being. It could be somebody that's anxious or depressed, maybe a substance use problem, and somebody that's in a crisis situation. That could be a traumatic event, severe effects from alcohol use, panic attacks, and suicide. Those are kinds of situations where you have to act immediately. Whereas the mental well-being situations are ones where you've got time to play with, you kind of reach out, how you doing, how can I help, and maybe offer some resources. The crisis situation, you don't do that. So first, the mental first aid looks at both of those things. Okay, declining mental well-being and also crisis situation. Excuse me. Now, why do we need it? Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that 50% of people will develop a mental health illness in their lifetime. It's that high, and I would suspect it's higher. That we don't know the half of it. People struggle, they don't tell us, or we don't pay attention to it because we're uncomfortable. I mean, it's hard to say to somebody, hey, I've noticed you're not sleeping well, you don't seem yourself, I'm concerned, how can I help? It's hard to do that because they're going to say, no, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong. Okay? But what mental health first aid teaches you is you don't stop there. You approach them again maybe a day or two later. You have to be like a salesman or salesperson. You got to keep at it if you think there's something wrong. Because people are embarrassed. That's the bottom line. They're embarrassed, they're ashamed about it. And it's an illness like anything else. Everybody needs help sometime. The other reason we need it is you may notice signs of declining mental well-being in other people. You might notice those things in family or friends. They are not sleeping well, they're not they're not engaging, they're isolating. A friend that you go to yoga class with stops going. So you pay attention to that. And the other thing we focus on with mental health first aid is you may notice it in yourself. You may notice changes in yourself that need to be dealt with. So we go into that as well. And what do you do when you notice these changes? Okay. Now these are the two things that you can do. Okay, when you notice that somebody is struggling. First of all, don't ignore it. It's easy to ignore it. You think about a phone call where you see a friend that's all distressed about something. You're tired, you want to go to bed, you've got things on your mind, you've got your own problems. And the last thing you might want to do is sort of say, hey, you seem like you're struggling, how can I help? You open up a whole can of worms and you have to talk, and you can't leave it. So we have to be prepared for that. And that's where self-care comes in. Like we have to look after ourselves. So you don't ignore the signs. And secondly, you reach out. You talk to them. You say something to them, like I said earlier. You don't ignore it. Okay? You're probably all wondering at this point, does this work? Okay? Well, it does work. And I can remember when I first started doing this, 2016, I was sort of uncertain. I didn't know what to make of it, but I did it. And after I did about 4 or 5, 6 in-person trainings, I noticed something that really struck me. People were walking out of the room. They were looking happy. And they were saying, I can do this. I can really do this. I know what to do now. And to me, that was just mind-blowing. Because it really was genuine. You could see it. And it's just a simple matter of, I can do it. I can approach somebody. I can reach out to somebody. That's all it takes. So I saw it work, but there's also research. There's a greater recognition now. The studies they've done have shown that there's a greater recognition of declining mental well-being when people take the training. Secondly, there's decreased distance from people experiencing mental health problems. So people taking the training are more likely to approach people. And finally, there's an increased confidence, just like I told you about. You're able to help, provide help. Okay, you don't hold back on it. Okay? And I think we have to, and this to me, it's all wrapped up with our common humanity. Like we're all people, and we have to care about each other. So it's all wrapped up in that, and I think this is what it's all about. The way the world is now, it's so difficult. There's so much going on. You don't even want to hear about half of it. Okay? When you think about Israel, what's happening to the people there, it's hard. But the common humanity has to come into this. Okay, course objectives. The goal of the course is to effectively prepare people to do mental health first aid. People taking it are going to learn to recognize the signs or changes in behavior. It may indicate a person experiencing a decline in their mental well-being or mental health or substance use crisis. They're going to learn to have conversations with people that are struggling, talk about declines in their mental well-being, and have them reach out to supports or encourage them to do that. And they're going to respond with helpful actions if there's a crisis. They're going to know what to do. You know who to call. You know where to go. And finally, they're going to learn to practice self-care. So you are as restored and as replenished as you can be to help somebody. The program is broken into 3 modules, as I mentioned earlier. So the first module is the introduction, and that is done on your own for 2 hours. You do that before you come into the virtual classrooms. And then there's the virtual classroom that consists of 2 3.5-hour modules. The first one is for declining mental well-being, and the second one is for crisis. Okay, so we go through, in module 1, which is on your own, we talk about key concepts, which I'll go through a few of them. Declining mental well-being, we talk about depression, we talk about anxiety, and we review concepts from Module 1. And for the crisis situations, the final module, once again, we talk about, it's also 3.5 hours, we talk about things like suicide, panic attack, trauma, and severe effects of alcohol use. And we talk about self-care and how to improve your own mental well-being. So the total thing is about 9 hours. Okay? 2 hours on your own, 7 hours virtually, often on 2 different days. So what it doesn't do is teach you how to counsel people or become therapists. I talked about the first aid model before, and that's what it's premised on. We don't teach you to use therapy. We're not counselors. And secondly, we don't teach you to diagnose. In fact, we avoid diagnoses. We talk about them a little bit, but we're more, in the training, it's more about behavioral change and looking at noticing people's behavioral change. Do it that way. Okay, let's look at key concepts, and I'm just going to do this, 2 of them. One is called LGs, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. You're wondering probably. And then we're going to talk a bit about stigma. So LGs are the mental health first aid's core of the program. These are your main actions that you will do when you're interacting with somebody. Okay, so the A stands for you approach, assess, and assist. Okay, so you're approaching and assessing a person, asking questions, and you assist them when they're in a crisis. The L is about listening, learning to communicate non-judgmentally, without judgment, in a caring way, in a respectful way, and I'm going to talk more about that after this. Giving reassurance and information is about hope and optimism, providing not resources, but information about what's happening. The E has to do with encouraging other resources. It could be professional, like the family doctor or therapist, or it could be clergy, family, friends. And finally, we talk about self-care for the first aider. Right? So this is your core of the program. You learn to manipulate and to use all these actions. Okay. Now, let me talk about communication, because I think if I'm picking one thing for you to take away today, that's one of them, is respectful communication. And that the program talks a lot about that. Respectful communication, and I'm not meaning to suggest that you are not communicating respectfully at all, but this is the framework that we use. We talk about using I statements. So when you talk to somebody, you'd say things like, I'd like to understand what you're going through. I notice you seem down today. It's not you seem down today, how can I help? I'm a little worried about you. Would you like to talk? You focus on empathy and understanding, seeing things from the other person's perspective. Saying things like, I see, I understand. You approach in private. Obviously, you're not going to talk to them amongst a whole group of people. How you say something is as important as what you say. Tone of voice, your eye contact, which is the next part, paying attention to all of that. Your body language, your nonverbal behavior speaks 95% of your communication. The words you say about 5. Okay, so you position yourself so you're looking at the person, there's eye contact, you're not standing with your phone, ready to talk to somebody by your ear. You really focus on that person. You avoid stigmatizing language, which I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you some examples about that. And you give the person plenty of time, plenty of airtime. Don't rush them. Listen. Don't look like you're in a hurry. I've got this habit when I'm at home. If my husband would hear that, he would really laugh. That he's asking me something and I've got one foot out the doorway. Like, he just, it drives him crazy. Okay, but yeah, it's a bad habit. But you don't do that. Now, in terms of respectful communication and things to avoid, I've just put a few things here. One is hostility and sarcasm. You don't want to say something like, sure, I've heard you say that before. Very sarcastic. It's not the first time you've said that, or roll your eyes. Okay? You don't want to do that kind of thing. You don't give advice. Okay? You don't tell people what to do. You don't say, you need to go to the doctor or a therapist, here's the phone number. But rather you say, would you consider going to see your doctor, or would you consider seeing a therapist? Don't interrupt. I think that's kind of common sense. We all know that, but we do it. Just be mindful of it. And don't jump in to fill silence. I mean, silence, when the conversation stops, there's a purpose for it. Let it ride. The person may be thinking, they may be regrouping, a whole bunch of things. So let silence happen for a little bit. It's okay. Okay, so don't avoid that kind of thing. To kind of pull this together, I'm going to show you this video that I absolutely love. It's called Empathy versus Sympathy. Brene Brown. It's about 3 minutes. What I want you to watch for is two things. First of all, what is empathy? What's the difference? What is empathy, number one? And number two, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Okay, so here it goes.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, isn't that profound? Okay. So what is it there? I'll invite comments. It's done, okay. I'll invite comments, and if there's any online, please as well. What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Anybody want to give it a try? Yeah.
Sympathy doesn't.
Thank you.
Sympathy doesn't connect you with the other person. It separates you. So when you're sympathetic, you're feeling sorry for them. Oh, I'm never going to be there. That's this person's problem, not mine.
So they're less than you. They're not equal.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else want to give it a try? What they took away from the difference between empathy and sympathy? What do you think? Yeah, Rabbi.
I think empathy is also not trying to problem solve. A lot of sympathy, at least from what Brené Brown was saying, was about problem solving, trying to make it better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we look at that, it's really about, both of you have kind of hit it right on, but she also really talks about empathy fuels connection. Okay? Whereas sympathy takes the connection away. Okay? It causes disconnection. Like right away, they're here, and you're here, you're the helper, you know more, and you've got it all right. Okay? It's also, the empathy part is about being with people. It's sort of just sitting with them. You don't have to talk. It's just sitting with them side by side. Your presence is there. Understanding their perspective, staying out of judgment for sure. Nobody likes to be judged. I mean, when you think about it, you don't talk to somebody that's going to judge you. Like, it's just not comfortable. Empathy doesn't involve any judgment, and it's really about holding space for them. And once again, I'll repeat this because we'll get to it later. In order to do that, you have to look after yourself. Self-care. It's hard to do this when you're not nourished. Okay. So I think that video says it all. I really can't add to it, but it's just really about being with somebody, holding space for them, and just connecting with them. Just jumping into their world. What's their world like? And sometimes that's scary because their world can be pretty awful. Right? All right, the other key concept, and this is a huge, huge one, is stigma. To me, if stigma didn't exist, mental health problems won't be nearly as bad as they are, because stigma causes a lot of the problem. It prevents people from reaching out. It prevents people from getting help. I know you know what stigma is. It's sort of the negative way we look at people which are different, the way they're labeled. Somebody's got a mental illness, they've got a label, and that label, they're separated, and then there's prejudice because you don't understand it, and then there's discrimination where the person is shamed. This happens with culture, religion, all different kinds of things. There's no place for it, but nonetheless, it's there. It's getting better. The fact that you're all here tonight sort of speaks to that, but it is getting better. We're more welcoming of it. People that are very well known come out and talk about their mental health problems, sports players and musicians. When I think about Lady Gaga, I think she's incredible. She's got so many mental health problems, you don't even hear about it. But she does amazing stuff. Okay, so the stigma partly is to people think that if you have a mental illness, that you're not capable. Well, that's not the case. You can be extremely capable and accomplished, and many are. So we got to get rid of stigma, and I think one thing that we can do is watch the language that we use. The words we use matter, and I think sometimes we're not aware or we don't understand the impact of some words. You can build rapport as a helper by using respectful language. Okay? An example, stigmatizing, it drives me crazy. A more respectful way of saying it is it bothers, annoys, or frustrates me. Now I'm going to put up a list here. I'm going to see if anybody wants to try. And it can be online too, for those of you that are streaming. This person is schizophrenic. Anybody want to try? You're not being marked.
The person has schizophrenia.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Person with schizophrenia or the person has schizophrenia. Okay, we don't say somebody with cancer, a person is cancer. It doesn't make sense. Same thing with schizophrenia. They happen to be a person who has schizophrenia. Substance abuse. Anybody want to try that one? How might you reword that more respectfully? Hey.
Could say they have trouble with addiction
What, addiction?
to substances or alcohol or drugs.
Yes, it may say it that way. The word addiction can be stigmatizing.
Okay.
So we have to be careful with that. So you're on the right track with that. They had trouble with drugs, might work, or you might want to say a substance use problem. We don't use the word abuse anymore. It doesn't sound like much, but it's stigmatizing. Who wants to? You're doing great, by the way. Okay, the individual that suffers from depression. Who would like to give that a whirl? Oh, thank you.
This person struggles with depression?
That could be one way to reword it. The person lives with depression or experiencing depression. The way you said it is fine as well. It's less stigmatizing. What about, this is a big one. Okay, so let's hear how you do with this. Committed suicide. Yes?
This individual died by suicide?
Yes. You got it. Okay. The individual died by suicide. They ended their life by suicide. Now let me just talk a little bit about this because the word that's the problem here is committed. But I won't go into too much detail, but what happened, healthcare people were learning that when family members lost a loved one to suicide and they heard the word committed's a crime, right? So it was like a double whammy. Not only did they lose a loved one in a disastrous, tragic way, but they're also being told their loved one committed a crime. So that's why we don't use it. You see it in the paper, and quite honestly, this was the hardest one for me to change. I've been in the healthcare field so long, to change that wording took me time, because I was so used to saying that. But that's an important one. Okay? What about failed or unsuccessful suicide attempt? Anybody want to try that one? Yes, over here.
Survived a suicide attempt?
You could say it that way. Attempted suicide is also okay. And finally, they used to be an addict. We want to give that a try? Yeah, thank you.
They've overcome addiction.
Okay, it works for sure. They are in recovery is another way. Addiction, we have to be careful with that one. Okay, so they are in recovery. So this is just a taste of something you can do using your language to be respectful to people. And I'm not saying it's easy. Like we're so used to talking a certain way that it takes time and it takes sort of an awareness. So don't be hard on yourself about it. But if you're mindful of it, just try and change one word if you're using it. And it takes time. This didn't happen with me overnight. It really took time. Okay? Let's just talk quickly about mental health first aid for declining mental well-being. And I'm going to talk about anxiety very briefly. I'm just mindful. Oh, we've got time. We're good, aren't we? Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about anxiety because that's one of the kinds of things that we talk about in the declining mental well-being module. Now, we all experience anxiety. Does anybody here not experience anxiety? We all do. Okay, it's a normal kind of thing to happen, and something may happen. We get a phone call, somebody's ill in your family, or different things like that. So you get anxious about it. Something's happening at work. You deal with it. And then it's gone. This is normal. Okay, this is a normal kind of thing. The signs and symptoms, and we all go through the signs and symptoms of anxiety. We have to be mindful that they're far-reaching. They can be psychological and they can be physical. Things like fear, trepidation, inappropriate worry, can't concentrate, your environment feels unreal. Detached from oneself. I know when I get anxious, I get numbness and tingling in my arms sometimes. And that's one of the symptoms of it. You're easily distracted, irritable, and you can't sleep. Now the physical, there's lots of those too when we talk about anxiety. Like heart palpitations, chest pain, rapid heart rate, gastric problems, nausea, vomiting, and it goes on, muscle aches. So we have to be mindful that it can be both psychological and physical, and people often will go to the doctor complaining of stomach problems, muscle aches, and it's anxiety. Okay, that's quite common. Okay? Now, this normal anxiety that we tend to deal with on a daily basis, some people have more difficulty with it because you're wired differently. Other people are hyper, some people are calm. I've got a nephew who's just extremely calm. Nothing gets him roused. And people are like that. Other people are just hyper. Okay, that's just the way you're born. But this is different than an anxiety disorder. Okay, a diagnosable disorder. We talk about an anxiety disorder that psychiatrists, psychologists diagnose. They look it up in this big book called the DSM-5 TKR, and it gives you all the signs and symptoms. This kind of anxiety with a disorder is more severe, and it's longer lasting than normal anxiety. It doesn't let up, persists. It can vary in severity from mild uneasiness to terrifying panic attacks, and it can vary how long it lasts. When you look at, there's different kinds of anxiety disorders, which I'm not going to go into. When you look at a generalized anxiety disorder, the symptoms last 6 months. Okay, it's worry about work, health, family, anything like that. It focuses on, it could be 2 or 3 things. But the symptoms don't let up for 6 months. If you don't have an anxiety disorder, you pull out your coping tools and you deal with it. Sometimes it takes longer than others. But that's the way we do. And that's how you distinguish between the two. These are some of the diagnosed anxiety disorders. And you'll have these slides. Generalized anxiety. There's social anxiety, where you're very shy. You're afraid of being judged. You won't speak in public. Obsessive compulsive disorder, where you have obsessive thoughts and then behaviors that go with that help calm your anxiety. It could be hand washing. It could be checking a door 10 times, all those kinds of things. A panic disorder, which I'm going to talk about next, is part of the declining crisis situation, and phobias. Okay, where you have phobias, perhaps a specific fear. It could be heights. It could be elevators. It could be crowds. Those are much easier dealt with. They're very specific. So those are just a few examples. Okay? Then when we look at the crisis part, a mental health first aid for crisis, here's where we get into a panic attack as an example of a crisis situation. And this is a type of anxiety disorder. People with panic attacks can have a wide range of symptoms: pounding or racing heart, sweating, trembling. They can have difficulty breathing, tingling, numb hands, or chest pain. Very sudden onset. Now, the thing about this, a panic attack, is that it can mimic a heart attack. Somebody who's having a panic attack thinks they're having a heart attack. And if they don't have a history of panic attacks, they need to go to the hospital to be assessed, because they can't tell the difference. Okay? I remember a situation once when I was doing groups, psychoeducational groups for trauma, and the group ended. There was about 10 people, everybody left, and this lady stayed behind, and she was at the table sort of like this. And she wouldn't move, she wouldn't talk. We didn't know what was wrong. And she was breathing in and out very deeply. And then we asked her how we can help. She said, "I'm having a panic attack. I have them all the time." And then she started breathing again. It subsided. 10, 15 minutes. We didn't call 911 because she told us she had them all the time. If that wasn't the case, we would have called 911. Okay, so what you do with a panic attack is stay with the person, don't leave them, get them out of a crowd, be calm and reassuring, and call 911 if you have to. This is different from a panic disorder. A panic disorder is where you have ongoing, recurrent, unexpected panic attacks. Okay, they happen regularly. Whereas the panic attack, it can be a one-time situation, and it may never happen again. It's scary. You know, if anybody's ever been with somebody that's had a panic attack, it's scary. They're terrified. They're petrified. So we consider that a crisis situation and help is needed. So those are just a few examples of what we do in the modules. I mean, they're very brief. And having gone through all that, I think it's really, really important that we talk about self-care. And it is part of the program. So, what is self-care? I'm sure you all know. Does anybody want to give it a try? Like, well, what do you describe self-care as? Anybody? I'm sure you're all doing it. Lise? Yeah?
Yes, just taking care of all of your own needs so that if you're supporting, well, in the case of supporting someone else, you make sure you're taking care of yourself so you don't go down with them.
That's right. Exactly. And I look at it as finding joy in life. You do what you enjoy. It could be taking a walk. It could be hiking. It could be patting your dog. It could be reading a book. Okay? It doesn't matter what it is, but whatever gives you joy. Have you heard the word flow? It'll put you in the flow. You heard that? It's when you start doing something and you completely lose time. You're totally so absorbed you don't even know you're doing it and you just keep at it. So it puts you in the flow. Okay, so you're able to replenish yourself. It's like if you look at a piggy bank and you keep taking money out and you don't put anything back, what happens? Bankrupt. So you can become emotionally bankrupt too if you don't replenish yourself. And people often will think that it's selfish. I don't deserve the time. I have other things to do. I've got a family to look after. I've got money to make. I've got older parents to look after. But the fact is that if you don't look after yourself, you're not going to be much good to other people. And it's hard sometimes. I mean, it's hard to find the time to do it, but especially when you're working. You know, I know what it's like. You're really stretched, but you can find things to do that take a couple minutes. You know, it could be meditating for a couple minutes. It could be just following your breath. It could be sniffing the air. It could be looking at a photograph or a picture. It could be calling a friend. Sometimes it doesn't have to take a long time. But it's so, so important. You know, you got to check in with yourself. You think back to the mental health continuum. You want to pick up when you're reacting. So check in with yourself. How am I doing? What's happening? Feeling a little out of sorts. What's going on? And what do I need now? I put different kinds of self-care down here. Like there's physical, you know, things like a walk, emotional, like maybe talking to somebody, the social, like interacting in groups, and spiritual, becoming the temple. Anything like that. Whatever you find meaning in. Personal, taking time for yourself, a hobby. Financial, making sure your books are in order. Like nobody likes doing that, but making sure you're budgeting and you're not overextending yourself because that can be really stressful. And work, like setting boundaries at work. Like, you know, telling people you're not going to be answering emails after 5 o'clock. Or setting boundaries there. You can't be everything to everybody. And that setting boundaries is a big piece of self-care. You know, like saying yes is easy, but when somebody asks you for something and you have to say no, it's hard. But sometimes you have to do that. Okay. Does anybody want to add about self-care from your perspective? There will be time later. Yes. Yeah, Mike.
Why do people assume that people know what to do for self-care? Like, people so often just say, oh yeah, as you know, we've talked about do self-care, but when I think that people that may use substances or overeat,
yes,
part of that is attempting to feel better. So I don't think it's rocket science all the way. I think it can be rocket science what it is one does to feel self-care.
That's interesting, an interesting perspective, because when somebody is doing substances, they're taking it to enjoy themselves, but the outcome is not. Yeah, that's an interesting discussion on that. But really the idea is it's to replenish yourself. That's not replenishing. That's depleting.
I guess I'm also saying that it's worthy of working with people to figure out what brings self-care.
Yes.
It's not always obvious to people what to do, else
True.
I think they might do it. And we don't focus a lot on asking, say, kids or other people, what do you do that makes you feel joy, and allowing for that.
Like what makes you feel good? What do you enjoy? Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to end with a coping tool, one of my favorites, self-compassion. Okay, and this is a practice. I'm going to talk about that. Self-compassion, you all heard the word. It's not unfamiliar to most of you, I'm sure. And it's about treating yourself with the same care, support, and understanding, kindness as you would a friend when they're struggling. We're often our own worst enemies. We treat other people better than we treat ourselves. And I can think of an example. I usually laugh when I say this, but I'm not going to tell you if it's true. I drove into the garage, and I guess I wasn't concentrating, rammed into the side and hooked off the mirror. And I get out of the car, and I am just furious with myself. How stupid, what an idiot, how could I be such a fool? What kinds of difficulty am I causing here? I can't see straight, can't judge distance. Look at me, I smashed the whole mirror up. Stomp into the house, and my husband's there. And he looks at me, what happened? I smashed the mirror off the car. So he goes, sit down. It's okay. It could happen to anybody. Rubs my shoulder, gets me a glass of wine. Now, why can't I do that to myself? Okay? And we often treat other people much better. But this is an important thing because it allows us to cope better. It gives us strength and it gives us self-esteem if we can be compassionate to ourselves. And it's a practice, and once again, I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard. It's hard. I struggle with it on a regular basis. Keep coming back to it. But it's important. Kristin Neff is one of the main researchers that researches about self-compassion, and she breaks it down into 3 things. First thing is mindfulness, that you have to notice you're struggling. You have to notice you're suffering. And say to yourself, this is hard now. You check in with yourself. Second part she talks about is a common humanity. We're all imperfect. Like we all make mistakes. We lead imperfect lives. We all struggle at times. And you have to normalize that. Being human is to make mistakes and to be vulnerable. And finally, she talks about kindness. When all that happens, you talk to yourself with kindness like you would to a friend. What can I do to help? What'll make a difference now? In a soft tone of voice to yourself. Be very kind, gentle. Cycle these 3 things around. It is a practice, and you certainly can't just say, okay, I'm going to do self-compassion now, I'll be fine. No, it doesn't work that way. For some reason we're brought up to be critical of ourselves. I don't know many people that hasn't happened to you. You have to work at it, but it's so, so important. Okay? Finally, I just want to end with a quote about self-compassion from Hermann Hesse. I don't know if anyone's heard of him, but I really, really like this quote. You know quite well, deep within you, that there is only one single magic, a single power, a single salvation, and that is called loving. Well, then love yourself, love your suffering. Do not resist it. Do not flee from it. It is your aversion that hurts, nothing else. So something to think about. You will get a copy of that. And now we have our Q&A.
Thank you, Susan. For all of us that know that we should understand basic physical first aid. Hopefully, we have understood the importance of signing up for mental health first aid and the importance of it. So we'll start with the Q&A now. If you're here in the Mishkan, raise your hand and Susan will answer questions. Yeah. If you're watching us if you're watching from home or wherever you are virtually, you can type your questions into the chat box and they'll be asked here for as long as we have time. Any questions? There's one.
How do you help someone that isn't all that responsive
The
to...
mic's not working yet.
How do you help someone who's not all that responsive to your shares of concern and empathy when clearly they are struggling?
It could be.
When clearly they are struggling. How do you help someone that's not open?
When they're not open?
Not open to getting help.
Get somebody to talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you can't, so the question really is, if somebody doesn't want to talk, how do you get them to talk? You think they're struggling, but they won't talk. You think they're struggling, but they won't talk.
The mic's not on.
Oh, the mic's not on.
Is that on now?
No.
Our help perspective. Test, test, test. Is that working?
Yes, you voiced concerns and you've been empathetic and you've been, done all the do things, and they're still not willing to seek professional help.
Okay. So that's the other part of it. The two problems you run into are people don't want to talk to you, and the second one is they don't want to get help. Well, the reality is, unless somebody is in a crisis, you can't make them get help. Okay, if they're thinking about suicide, that's different. If they're having a panic attack or severe effects of alcohol or some other crisis, then you can't not get help. It just doesn't happen. But all the other situations, you can't force somebody. They have to be ready. It's hard. So all you can do is keep talking, be available, let them know you're there. If you want to talk, I'm here. Suggest resources. Here's a couple of resources if you should be interested. You cannot make somebody go. That's the most frustrating thing. Like if you're living with somebody that, as an example, that's drinking and they don't want to get help, that is so hard. Because you can see, I'm just using that as an example, I'm not, you can see the deterioration. And it's upsetting and it's scary. So you got to hold tight. You got to be there, and you got to have confidence that at one point they will be ready. There's no magic there, unfortunately. Yeah. Does that answer? Yes.
I think it's recognizing the goal is to deliver a loving, caring message, and change is out of our hands.
Yes. Absolutely.
It just provides an environment that hopefully they will, at some point, if they're ready to change, they'll know you're going to be
They have to be, that's the key part. They have to be ready. It's got to be loving, and you don't know when that'll be, when they're going to be ready. It's hard. It's not like somebody that's got cancer, and they say, oh, I've got cancer, I'm going to go to the doctor. And the majority of people will be willing to accept help. It's different. And that's the stigma's playing into that. But you're right, you're absolutely right.
So in this situation where you have done all the things that you've suggested, you've accepted them, you're empathic, you've used the right language, but things are escalating.
But they're
escalating. They're issues. You can see that they're losing control of their mental health, and what you do isn't helping and you're worried. Then what's the next step?
Well, you can only once again suggest, and if it's not a safety issue, there's not much you can do. If it's somebody living in your home, you can set boundaries. You can say you can't accept this and you may not let them live there. You can do that, but if it's not a safety issue, it's hard. I mean, even in the hospital now, it's a real problem. Like adults will go in, young adults, maybe 23, 24, 25, and maybe they have a serious mental illness. They cannot be forced to take treatment.
Right, so that sort of was my question. How do you know when it's time to call CAMH or call the Emerge or take them to Emerge?
Well, your gut feeling, but the basic premise is earlier the better, if they'll go. But if they don't want to go, I mean, you have to wait. They have to buy into it, or you got to wait till something becomes a safety issue. And even then, you're tied. I hate to sound like this, but they won't do anything without consent unless there is a major safety issue. It's a problem with the system. So I think what you were saying about loving and kindness, setting boundaries, if it comes to that, if it's something you can't live with, offering, making suggestions, not telling them what to do, not being judgmental, right? Like, sort of listen, spend time talking to them. And a heck of a lot of patience. Yeah.
Just wondering your thoughts on this. So working 17 years in youth mental health, we've had to work with parents mostly on connection over correction. Moving from always constantly correcting the child's struggle, but making sure we're connecting with them so that we do create space for communication. So I think there's value because of that empathy that Brené Brown talks about, connecting versus constantly trying to correct the behavior or constantly correcting, the struggle because we're scared of what might happen. I think there's value there to just make a connection.
Yeah. Good point. What age are you talking about?
Youth, like from 12 all the way to 18.
Okay. And that's a different perspective, too, because they're still children to some extent, right? So you have a little more control. I used to, you have a little more control at that age. So you can do more. But once they're an adult, it's really difficult. And I think the foundation there, to me, is building that trusting relationship with their kids. If you build that open and honest, trusting relationship, as a child, it's likely to continue. If you talk about mental health when they're a child, you sort of put it in your vocabulary. Oh, Uncle Joe has depression and he's not feeling well today. Or, I'm feeling really anxious. If you put that in their vocabulary at a young age, it doesn't become so scary.
And if I can add, I think I've noticed over time, doing it 17 years, that control is being shifted.
Yeah.
And parents' influence is being shifted.
Yeah.
And so many things are going on that all we can grab onto is connecting with them.
Yeah.
And trying to form those relationships.
And it's hard.
It's very hard.
It's hard till they're finding themselves, and it's scary because as a parent, you're petrified. Are they going to get into trouble? It's irreversible. What are they going to do? What are they going to do with their life? It's really scary. And I don't think there's any magic answer, but I think the kindness, the compassion, and talking when they're younger, educating them about feelings. Like, because oftentimes little kids don't know how to put words to feelings. And I think if you can help them with that, I think they're doing better at school with that now. But I think if you can help them with that, putting words to different feelings, it's really important because, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that. I think it's really important. It's hard. I mean, until you get through those years, you reap many gray hairs. Yes.
Susan, I appreciate you sort of sensitizing us to what mental health first aid is. One of the things that you did allude to is that, like a regular first aider in medical first aid, there is a limit to which you're able to provide assistance. Right. In this case, I'm wondering, I'm not a practitioner, so what is what are the resources that you can refer someone who you've identified and are trying to encourage to get assistance? Because I'm just not sure. So
Okay.
could you
If,
talk
it, if
more
it's
to that?
declining mental well-being, the first place I suggest usually is a family doctor if they have one. Do they have a therapist? Do they go into a psychologist? That's the first place to go. Family doctor, if you've got one, I know many people don't. That's the first place. I'm giving, at least we'll be sending out a whole list of resources, of places that you can call. You can have a look at that. It's about 3 pages long. Okay? And I think the other thing that keeps in mind, you have to know your community. You have to know what's out there. And this list will help you with that, with the different resources. But family doctors always the first place, community clinics. And, underlying all that, it's not easy because resources for mental health are limited. And I understand that. And often to get in to see a therapist, you're paying. Like you're seeing a psychologist, psychotherapist, you're paying. Like a psychologist could be up to $300 an hour. If you don't have extended health, it's hard. The free clinics, there's a waiting list. So it's difficult. The resources are there, but you have to have somebody help you navigate them. And I've given that list, and I'm glad to answer questions if people see things on the list that they don't understand. My email's on the slides. So if there's something you want to know more information about, I'm glad to help with that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Anything on street? No? Okay. People are taking it all in.
David has one. There's another question.
Okay. I was just curious, when you recognize somebody suffering anxiety and you want to make that first, somebody who's taken the course and has the proper training, like yourself, and you want to make that first entree into a conversation. I can see that you're not feeling well. I can see that you're suffering. And you say the right thing as an entry point. What do you do when you're faced with an absolute brick wall response? No. I don't know what you're talking about.
These are such good questions, because this is what can happen.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. You're obviously not observing correctly. I feel fine. But the person is not fine. What's the next
What's the next comment? I would say something like, I'm glad you're feeling fine, but I'm noticing A, B, and C, and I'm concerned. Is there any way I can help? Like validate what they're saying. Like I understand that you're feeling well, but I'm noticing whatever you're noticing. You're not sleeping or whatever. And I'm concerned, and I'd like to help you if I can. And you still may be met with a blank face. Don't give up. Try again. You may get them at the right time. And the other thing with that is that you may not be the right person. And that's okay too. Maybe somebody else can try. And I'm not saying that's the case, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes kids don't want to talk to their parents. But you don't give up. You're doing the right thing, but you try it again. And sometimes there are mood shifts. You get them at the right moment. Yeah. I wish there was something more to say, that it was more cut and dry. But mental health is not. It's shades of gray. It's not clear cut. There's many ways to go. You can find 5 psychiatrists or psychologists who will all say something different. And that's the reality of it. I think the bottom line is the person needs support. They need somebody with them. And when they're ready, they will reach out with you. You can walk them through it. And if it's a crisis, when there's safety, you always have to, you can't let that go. For sure. Great questions. Yeah. Are there others?
Susan, I think we're about...
Okay, we're about done? Okay.
We're about done.
Okay.
So I wanted to say thank you.
A pleasure.
As a way of showing our appreciation, we've made a donation to the Luke Sklar Mental Health
Thank
Initiative
you.
in your honor. Thank you.
Okay.
And we can't thank you enough for all your time and help in preparing for tonight's presentation, and personally awed at your, with your involvement in and advocacy
Okay.
in the mental health sector. So
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you. Thank you.
And just a couple of notes. Susan has generously agreed to share PDFs of her slides and the list. It's an extensive list of mental health resources for you. So that will also include a note on how to sign up for a mental health first aid course if interested, either through Susan. Her contact information will be on there, or the information provided by the Mental Health Commission, of which Susan is a member. There will also be a survey, and that will all come tomorrow morning in an email. There will also be a survey just, to find out how you felt about tonight's program. And we really value your input, so if you would fill that in, that would be terrific for us. So that's it. There's snacks over there. Help yourself if you'd like some. Thanks to the amazing Luke Sklar Mental Health Committee volunteer members. Thanks to Rabbi McCarroll. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for everyone attending.